Welcome back to our discussion on Chapter 13, the endocrine system. We are now discussing the pancreas. So, the pancreas is an oddly shaped organ. It is long, that's what elongated means. It's kind of flat and it's behind or posterior to the stomach in the abdominal pelvic cavity. So, at the superior aspect of the abdominal pelvic cavity, just behind the stomach, you have this elongated, flattened organ called the pancreas. The pancreas has a duct that runs along the length of it. That pancreatic duct will transport exocrine secretions that the pancreas produces. These exocrine secretions are digestive juices. Remember, an exocrine secretion is one that the cells will produce the product. That product will move through a duct to a body surface. So, the digestive enzymes, digestive juices produced by the pancreas will be transported through the pancreatic duct to the surface of the duodenum. The duodenum is part of the small intestine. It is the part of the small intestine that is connected directly to the end of the stomach. Excuse me. There are two major types of secretory tissue, two types of tissues that produce some type of product to be secreted. Um, the pancreas is an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland. Endocrine gland and an exocrine gland. This is part of the reason why it's important to remember the definition of endocrine and the definition of exocrine. So the endocrine function is a hormone production because those hormones will be secreted directly into the bloodstream or will travel throughout the body through the bloodstream. And the exocrine function is where you have the digestive enzymes that will travel through the pancreatic duct. There are three hormones that are secreted from the endocrine cells of the pancreas. Three hormones secreted by the endocrine cells of the pancreas. Excuse me, the cells that actually produce these hormones are called pancreatic islets, or another name for them are the islets of Langerhans. So pancreatic islets or the islets of Langerhans. The hormones that we are producing from these pancreatic islets are glucagon, insulin, and somatostatin. Glucagon, insulin, and somatostatin. Glucagon. So, first thing you want to note, gluco, sugar. This hormone has something to do with sugar in the body. We already know that insulin has something to do with sugar. So, how are they different? Glucagon is secreted by alpha cells and it increases blood glucose levels. So if you are working all day, if you're studying, if you're playing around and you're not paying attention and you don't eat because you forgot to eat, you were so into whatever you were doing that you just did not think about eating, and your blood glucose levels get low, then your pancreas can, specifically the alpha cells of the pancreas, can secrete glucagon so that then your body can start to do what it needs to do to increase glucose levels in the blood. Insulin is secreted by beta cells. The job of beta cells is to decrease glucose levels in the blood. So you eat a carbohydrate-rich meal or a sugar-rich meal, your body will notice that change in the internal environment, that increased glucose, and it will stimulate the beta cells of the pancreas to produce insulin. And then that insulin will go into the bloodstream and take those sugar molecules and pull them into the cells so that the cells can use them as energy and you can have less sugar in your bloodstream. Somatostatin. Remember your word parts. Make sure you look up somato and statin so you can understand a little bit more what this is doing. But somatostatin is secreted by the delta cells of the pancreas. What this does is it inhibits secretion of both insulin and glucagon. Inhibits secretion of insulin and glucagon. So those are the three endocrine hormones that your pancreas produces. So this is the funny shaped pancreas that is located behind or posterior to the stomach. It is elongated. You notice in the middle, you have like this tree-looking structure. This is the pancreatic duct. And so as these cells are um, making the exocrine secretions or the digestive enzymes. These enzymes are being produced and they are funneled into this pancreatic duct. The pancreatic duct will then carry it out of the pancreas and lead it to the small intestine. Remember, to a body surface. This is a surface of the small intestine so that then it can do its job in this space. So once the food leaves the stomach and goes into the small intestine, specifically the duodenum, because that is the first part of the small intestine, those digestive enzymes can then start to work on continuing the digestive process of those of that food that just left the stomach. All right. So this is all about the feedback loop of how blood glucose is regulated. Please make sure that you are paying attention to this. Look at it, draw it if you have to, understand it. Let this help you understand the other parts of or the information that we talked about earlier. So now let's talk diabetes. Diabetes is actually one of my favorite diseases. And I know that may sound strange, but diabetes is extremely interesting. All right. Diabetes, specifically diabetes mellitus, because there is a different type of diabetes that has nothing to do with sugar levels. All right. So diabetes mellitus is a metabolic disease that results from either a lack of insulin or an inability of cells to recognize insulin, meaning your body either stops producing the amount of insulin that you need, or your body has all the insulin that it needs, but the cells have stopped recognizing that insulin, which means that it may as well not have it because that insulin is not able to do the job that it's supposed to do because the cells are not recognizing. Either way it goes, whether you lack the insulin or you have the insulin and the cell is just not paying attention to it, that will result in an increased amount of glucose in the bloodstream. Because you start to have more sugar in your bloodstream, it starts to damage stuff. Think about if you are eating a a frozen cup, or you have a soda, um, or you're eating a donut that has glaze on it, and you get some of this stuff on your fingers, and now you go touching everything. Your fingers are sticky, the table is sticky, everything becomes more sticky because now you have all of this sugar that just kind of sticks on everything. Think about that in your body. Your elevated blood glucose, all of this sugar floating around in your blood, as it's starting to touch various organs, that stickiness of the glucose can eventually lead to damage. So, this is why people with diabetes will have increased blindness, increased heart problems. They often have to go on dialysis because of the kidney damage. And they will often have to, they may also have decreased sensation or altered sensation in their in their nerves, especially like the feet. So that increased blood sugar will go into these different organs and start to damage those tissues. It results in disturbances in carbohydrate, protein, and fat metabolism. I mean, you can't really metabolize things when you have all of this sugar floating around, taking up space, getting in the way, and sticking to things. Insulin normally promotes glucose uptake by adipose tissue and muscle cells. So when insulin goes into the body, into the bloodstream and takes that sugar and pulls it into a cell, those sugar molecules are either going to be added to your fat cells as more energy storage for later, or it'll go into muscle cells to give those muscle cells a source of energy in that moment. That's what normally happens. But in diabetes, diabetes mellitus, because this glucose cannot get into those cells in a regular, uh, at a normal pace, then that's where the problems will start to occur. You get hyperglycemia. So hyper meaning excess, glyce or glyco, sugar, emia, blood. So this is excess sugar in the blood. That is the result. So you can't take the sugar out of the blood to bring it into the cells. So the blood and the sugar in the blood continues to increase, which means that the cells now don't have sugar for energy. I've heard diabetes mellitus called starving in a sea of plenty. Starving in a sea of plenty, meaning you have plenty of sugar, plenty of fuel to feed those cells and to help those cells make energy. But the cell, even though all the sugar is around it, is starving because the sugar, even though it's right there, it cannot get in. Doesn't that sound like modern society? We have all of this abundance in modern society. We have all this abundance of food in our Western culture, but you still have people who go hungry. All right. They're starving in a sea of plenty. So that's a sidebar. Let me go back. So because these cells don't have glucose as an energy source, they have to create energy from non-carbohydrate sources. Remember, I said you can create glucose from amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. You can also produce glucose from lipids. So, because you are turning to these alternate energy sources, this is going to promote tissue wasting. So, if you have to start making um, glucose from amino acids, where do you think you're getting the amino acids? Amino acids will come from your proteins. Proteins make up your muscles. So basically, your body has to start breaking down your muscle tissue in order to take those proteins to make amino acids so that then those amino acids can be converted to glucose so that that person can get energy. Isn't that a lot? Anyway, so the person will start to lose weight because now you have muscle wasting and your body is utilizing all of the adipose tissue to start to make glucose. Um, the person's hunger increases. You're not making glucose, you're not getting glucose from later, so your body feels like it needs you to eat. And so you keep getting these hunger signals, even though you have all the energy you need, your body can't recognize it. So it's there, but it can't feel it. So that turns the hunger signal on because your body thinks there's nothing here, give me more food. Fatigue increases because you don't have adequate energy because now you're trying to make glucose from proteins and lipids, and you're not able to keep up, so that person gets more fatigued. Wounds don't heal. You got a lot of sugar floating around in your blood. Your body can't really heal when it's has all that sticky sugar around. And if a child has diabetes and it's not monitored, they can be shorter in stature. Glucose will spill into the urine. That's called glycosuria. Urea refers to urine, and of course, glyco refers to sugar. So if you have high levels of sugar above a certain amount, that sugar will then start to be excreted out of the body through the urine, which is why people can take a urinalysis or analyze the urine. And if there is glucose, then we know that the person has um, poorly regulated blood sugar because that threshold amount of glucose has been exceeded and now is spilling out into the urine. Where sugar goes, water is going to go because now your body's trying to dilute some of that sugar. So then a person can become very thirsty and dehydrated. And that thirst and dehydration is one of those telltale signs of a person having diabetes. There are different types of diabetes. You have two main types of diabetes. Hold up, let me see. All right, two main types of diabetes. There are several other, but two main types of diabetes is type 1 and type 2, diabetes mellitus. Type 1, we used to call it juvenile onset diabetes. We've kind of shied away from that name. So the more correct name will be insulin dependent diabetes. So juvenile onset or insulin dependent diabetes, again, that's type 1. It usually begins before age 20. I actually have a little cousin who was 24 or 25 when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So it still can occur in the 20s. It's just usually occurring before age 20, usually like in little kids, but anyone like from newborn to their 20s. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. Auto meaning self. What it means is that the immune system will start to produce antibodies that will destroy the beta cells of the pancreas. It starts to look at those beta cells as foreign invaders and think that it needs to be attacked and killed. So if you are destroying the beta cells, remember, let me go back. It is the beta cells that is actually producing insulin. So a type 1 diabetic is someone whose immune system is fighting and destroying the cells of the pancreas that is producing insulin, which results in that person having very little insulin being produced by their own bodies, which means their blood sugar levels are going to increase because they have no insulin or very little insulin to take the sugar out of the blood and bring it into the cells. Type 1 diabetics take up about 5 to 10% of cases of total cases of diabetes diagnosed. So of One of all the people who are diagnosed with diabetes, 5 to 10% of those have type 1 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is going to be the majority of the types of diabetes that is produced. Type 2 diabetes, we've called it maturity onset. In the past, we've called it adult onset diabetes. It's also called non-insulin dependent diabetes. Insulin is produced by those bodies. Their beta cells are working, they are working hard, they are producing insulin because they're recognizing high glucose levels and they're just spitting the insulin out. But the cells of the body have decided that they don't want to see insulin anymore because it sees too much of it. It's just tired. So those cells stop being able to recognize the insulin that is there, which means that because their body stops recognizing that that insulin is not able to bring the sugar that's in the blood into the cells. Complications include coronary artery disease, nerve, and retinal damage. So that's what we were talking about before. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease where the body is not making insulin at all or making very little insulin because the immune system is destroying the beta cells of the pancreas and that's why these people are insulin dependent because they're absolutely not making it. So if they want to live, they want to survive, they have to inject insulin into their bodies because their body is not making it. Type 2 diabetes is non-insulin dependent diabetes. They're actually making it. Their cells are just not recognizing it. So they don't start off needing to inject insulin. Now, how is diabetes type 1 and type 2 treated? Well, type 1 diabetes, as I mentioned before, you have to inject insulin. You must inject insulin. Even as a holistic health practitioner, I will encourage my type 1 diabetes patients to inject insulin. If there's a practitioner who tells somebody to not do that, that could potentially be medical mismanagement because that person is not producing it, and that can have detrimental results later on if it's not done properly. This insulin is typically obtained from pigs and cows. Human insulin can be synthesized using technology, recombinant DNA technology. Insulin is produced by genetically altered bacteria. So, this is where microbiology comes in. They looked at these bacteria and they found a way to inject the insulin producing mechanism into these bacteria so that then the bacteria is producing insulin that can then be cleaned up, put into a vial, and then that person can inject it. So people receive insulin through injections, through an insulin pump, or in an aerosol form. So they can then take that insulin and put it like in a nose spray. So if somebody passes out because because they have too little insulin, their cells are not being fed, et cetera, they can give that person insulin through an aerosol. There's also transdermal delivery being developed. Transdermal, across, dermal, skin. So basically, they take a patch, they put the insulin on the patch. The patch is attached to the skin, and the person can receive insulin across the skin. Pancreatic islet transplantation is being used and developed in some countries. So basically, you take part of someone else's pancreas and implant it into that body of the person that has type 1 diabetes so that hopefully that transplanted pancreas will start to produce adequate amounts of insulin. Type 2 diabetes, um, type 2 diabetes is called a disease of lifestyle. It's a disease of lifestyle, meaning the way the person is living, the way the person is eating and exercising or not exercising is all what is controlling um, how much glucose is in the bloodstream. So, in order to treat type 2 diabetes, there are things that a person can do to actually reverse type 2 diabetes. Yes, I'll say that again. You can potentially reverse type 2 diabetes where the person is no longer diabetic. They do that by changing their diet, so decreasing the amount of protein that is, I'm sorry, not protein, decreasing the amount of sugars and carbohydrates that the person is taking in that is eating, and increasing the amount of protein-rich foods that a person is eating. Now, that protein-rich food could be meats, or it could be vegetables that is high in protein, but decrease carbohydrates, increase protein, also increase exercise amounts. The more a person moves, the less a person is dependent on insulin. There are processes where the body, the cells can take in blood sugar without the function of insulin, but that only occurs through exercise. Also, by exercising, you are increasing the metabolism of the muscle cells. Muscle cells are doing more, so they need more glucose so that they can make more energy. So now you have more cells utilizing more of that glucose. So those are two ways that you can actually reduce the effects of type 2 diabetes, or even potentially reverse it. There are also medications that will, um, that's weird, increase glucose production. I'm assuming that meant increase uh, insulin production. But anyway, there are medications that diabetics take to help maintain adequate glucose levels. And then gastric bypass surgery. So research has found that people who have gastric bypass surgery, which is one of the weight loss surgeries, one of the side effects, so to speak, is more balanced glucose. And the last time I looked, and I have to admit that's been a while ago, um, they weren't quite sure why that is, but they found again that a person can reverse their diabetes by having part of their stomach removed. And usually they do that for weight loss surgery. All right. So let's talk about these smaller, less known endocrine glands. You have the pineal gland, the thymus, and some other glands that have endocrine function. The pineal gland is found in the brain between the cerebral hemispheres. So, pineal gland, pituitary gland, two different glands, both located in the brain. They're in two different locations. The functions of the pineal gland, or some of the functions of the pineal gland, secrete melatonin. Melatonin, you may have heard of before because it is an over-the-counter supplement that people take to help them sleep. Your body actually produces melatonin in your pineal gland, and that is part of what helps to regulate your circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm is your sleep-wake cycle. All right. So, as the sun goes down, your body starts to recognize that there is a decrease in light, and that will increase melatonin production, which is why you start to get sleepy when the sun goes down. There is the thymus. The thymus is located in the mediastinum, so make sure that you go back and review where the mediastinum is. We talked about this um, in the very beginning of AMP1, so go ahead and refresh yourself there. So it's found between the lungs. What it does is it secretes thymosin. Thymosin promotes the development of T cells, T lymphocytes. A lymphocyte is a cell. Cyte means cell. Lympho has to do with the lymphatic system, and in particular, this is a function of the immune system. So, thymosins help to promote the development and maturation of these T cells, which are part of your immune system. You have other glands, so you have your reproductive organs, your digestive glands, your heart, your kidneys. These have, well, the reproductive organs, you have your ovaries that produce estrogen and progesterone. The testes produce testosterone. The placenta, so when mom is pregnant, she needs excess estrogen, progesterone, and a gonadotropin so that not only does she have enough for herself, but she also has enough to maintain her pregnancy. You have the digestive glands. The digestive glands will produce hormones that regulate digestion. Now, when we talked about digestion before, especially when we were talking about the pancreas, we called those exocrine because those were enzymes that were secreted through a duct to um, a bodily surface, specifically the small intestine, to actually help digest food. When we talk about digestive glands here, we're actually talking about hormone production. So these glands are producing hormones that go into the bloodstream and they actually regulate the digestive process itself. So, hunger, not hunger, how fast is the food moving through the digestive system? That is the part that is regulated by the digestive glands, but it's not, it does not directly mean digestive enzymes, even though it can play a part in how and when those digestive enzymes function. You have the heart. We know that the heart's primary role is to pump the blood to the lungs to get oxygen, as well as pumping it throughout the body so that that oxygen can be distributed and dispersed throughout the cell, through the cells throughout the body. But a secondary function of the heart is also an endocrine function. So the heart will produce natriuretic peptide, which is a molecule, an endocrine molecule that will stimulate sodium secretion in the urine. Well, remember, when we secrete um, sodium into the urine, when we remove sodium from the body and it goes into the urine, you will also control the water concentration. So water is going to follow the salt. And so then how much blood the heart is pumping, how much pressure the heart needs to pump that blood is then affected by how much sodium and water is in the body and in the blood. And that has to do with the natriuretic peptides. And then the kidneys will produce erythropoietin. Remember, erythro means red. Erythropoietin has the function of stimulating red blood cell formation. So even though the main function that we know of the kidneys is to filter red blood cells, filter the blood, not filter red blood cells, filter the plasma so that that plasma, the waste that's in the plasma can be removed. It will also produce erythropoietin so that the body can stimulate more red blood cell production. Let's talk stress. So, your survival depends on maintaining homeostasis. Your survival depends on balance in all aspects of the body. Factors that change the internal and external environment can change your life can potentially end your life. And so, because of that, certain potentially dangerous factors can trigger a loss of homeostasis. We already said that you have to maintain homeostasis in order to survive, but remember that everything is always in flux. So, when the sensory receptors detect certain changes from the internal and external environments, those receptors will send signals, will send impulses to the hypothalamus in the brain. Once the hypothalamus receives that information, the hypothalamus will then activate the sympathetic nervous system to increase secretion of the adrenal hormones, specifically those stress hormones. Factors that are capable of initiating this response is called a stressor. So, when the Rottweiler gets out of the gate and starts running towards you, that's a stressor. When a teacher says you have a test tomorrow and you forgot, that's a stressor. All of those are stressors. Stress is the condition um, that is produced in response to those stressors. So the stressor is the thing, the test, the bill, the car accident, the Rottweiler, whatever it is. The stressor is going to cause a response in the body, and that response in the body is called stress. There are different types of stress. You have your psychological stresses, you have your physical stresses. So, stress is defined as the real or perceived threat that occurs to a body. So, when we talk about perceived threat, we're thinking about these psychological stressors. So, any kind of danger, whether it's actual danger or you're just imagining the danger. Imagine danger. Think about how many conversations have you had in your head and you started creating scenarios, and all of a sudden you started freaking out because of the scenarios that you created. They haven't happened, but they're in your head, which means your body is still going to respond. Personal loss, that could be the loss of a parent, the loss of a grandparent, that could be the loss of a relationship. You just broke up with your person. You lost a BFF. You lost your AirPods. That's a stressor, right? You lost a book. So it doesn't have to necessarily be like a death in a family. It can be some other personal loss that you feel close to. A psychological stressor can be anger, it can be fear, or it can be guilt. Any of those can cause stress. And you notice those are all mental and emotional. Those are all in your head. They're important, but they're actually in your head. Psychological stressors. Stress. Physical stress, temperature change, extreme temperature change. Um, in the winter, when the temperature drops 30, 40, 50 degrees overnight, over a couple of a few hours, or when the temperature gets really high in the summertime, or when the humidity gets really high in the summertime and it makes it extremely hot. Those are extreme temperatures causing physical stress because they are physically affecting your body. Infection, so bacteria, virus, um, parasite, those are physical infections. Injury, lack of oxygen, all of those are physical stressors. Whether the stress is in your head or it's actually on your body, it will cause the same effect in the body. That is the change of homeostasis. And so now the body has to do what it can to get you out of danger so that you can maintain or go back to your homeostatic ways. How does the body respond to stress? The way the body responds to stress is by hypothalamic control. All right, so that starts it. The response to stress is called your general adaptation syndrome. General adaptation syndrome. So you are generally adapting to the changes in your internal external environment. There are two stages to the general adaptation syndrome. There's alarm stage, and then you have the resistance stage. The alarm stage and the resistance stage. The alarm stage is where you have your fight or flight response. It is immediate and it doesn't last long, or it shouldn't last long. So you hear the Rottweiler barking, you hear it coming closer and closer. You look, you see it still down the road. You start running, you jump across a fence, you run in the house, you're out of danger. So all it takes, you have to sit there for a few minutes, gather yourself, catch your breath. Eventually it goes. It doesn't last long, and it should not last long. Sympathetic impulses. Remember, it's the sympathetic nervous system that is your fight or flight part of your nervous system. So, sympathetic impulses from the nervous system will then increase blood glucose and fatty acids. You need more glucose to help you run real fast so that you can get away from the Rottweiler. So, that is why that cortisol, remember, cortisol increases glucose by helping the body produce more glucose, increase that blood glucose so that the cells have more glucose to function with, to used to make ATP. So it increases blood glucose. It increases the heart rate. So now your heart is able to pump more blood to those muscles to help you get out of danger, to help you run away from the Rottweiler before it catches you. It increases your breath rate. You need more oxygen so that you can use that oxygen and the glucose to make more ATP. Um, your blood pressure increases. You want to make sure that you're getting the blood where it needs to go. Your airways are dilated. When something is dilated, it is opened. You want to get more air into your lungs so that you're getting more oxygen into your bloodstream and to those muscles that need it. You shunt blood to the skeletal muscles. You gotta make sure those muscles are well fed so that they can help you run or fight the dog. Your epinephrine secretion increases. Epinephrine is adrenaline. So that adrenaline is going to help to increase your metabolic process so that you are stronger and faster. You have just a slight better edge so that you can get away from or fight the dog. That is the alarm stage of the stress response. Now, the resistance stage is slower and it's longer acting. Basically, you have the CRH ACT cortisol pathway that increases your cortisol secretion. This increased cortisol will then spare glucose for the brain. Remember, the longer we're in a stress response, the more we're going through glucose so that we can run from the bear. Well, we need glucose in our brains for us to be able to think. So then this resistance stage is going to take some of that glucose and make sure that the brain has adequate fuel for you to use. Cortisol, glucagon, and growth hormone all mobilize energy sources for other tissues and organs. ADH and renin will then cause retention of water so that you can maintain the amount of fluid in your bloodstream so that you have adequate blood to take adequate oxygen to go throughout the body to help you to run away from the Rottweiler. Then you have the exhaustion stage. The exhaustion stage is a stage that you really don't want to get to. You know that fatigue or that, oh goodness, I'm forgetting. Burnout. This is sort of part of what's happening in burnout. Not completely, but um, have that as a part of your thought process as we go through it. So the exhaustion stage begins after months of being in the resistance stage. So if you are stressed long term, you are stressed day after day after day, month after month, year after year, your body will then leave, and go back, leave the alarm and resistance phase and move into the exhaustion phase. When this occurs, you'll start having more wasting in the body. So people who are highly stressed for long times, they may start to lose weight, or their muscles start to decrease in size because you're burning through the nutrients needed to help you get out of danger. You're just burning through it. You're using it a lot to help you run your fight or flight mode. You'll end up with electrolyte imbalances because, again, you're utilizing lots and lots of those nutrients in order to help you run away from the tiger. It will suppress the immune system. So, have you ever noticed that at the end of a really, really tough semester, you might get sick, you catch a cold or a flu, or have you ever known somebody that had that happen? Well, that is an example of them having been in that exhaustion phase. So, you have those 16 weeks, which is how long a semester is, 16 weeks of stress, and then after the final exam, as soon as that final exam is over, you get sick because your immune system was suppressed for so long that your immune system could not fight whatever was around you. The effects are due to long-term oversecretion of cortisol, and if a person is in this exhaustion phase for too long, it can result in death. So the moral of the story, learn how to manage your stress. Make sure that you are looking at this chart so that you can understand the general adaptation syndrome a little bit better. So, what happens as you get older? As you get older, the size of your endocrine glands are getting smaller. They're shrinking. So that means that you're not producing as much of those hormones. That can result in things like the strength of your muscles and your skeletal system decreases because your growth hormone levels decrease. Your ADH levels will increase. So then that person is eliminating waste and fluid more slowly by the kidneys and liver. Calcitonin levels will start to decrease, and so that can cause an increase of osteoporosis. Remember, calcitonin is responsible for decreasing blood calcium levels, and the way it does that is taking the calcium in the blood and depositing it in your bones to help make sure that those bones are nice and strong. If you decrease calcitonin levels, then you're going to make yourself at increased risk of osteoporosis. Excuse me. Parathyroid levels will also change. Sorry, parathyroid hormone levels will change. That'll also contribute to an increased risk of osteoporosis, especially in people born females, because there's also a change in estrogen levels, which also have to do with the strength of the bones. Insulin resistance may develop. Basically, the person's cells stop recognizing insulin. It is no longer seeing it as a thing. There are changes in melatonin secretion. And so you may have noticed that your elders, they don't necessarily sleep throughout the night. They don't sleep 8 hours at night because their melatonin production by the pineal gland will shift. And then there will be a decrease in thymosin production, which might cause an increase in infection because, if you remember, Thymosin is responsible for maturing T lymphocytes, which are part of your immune system. So that concludes chapter 13, your endocrine system. I will see you in the next chapter.